This training is being recorded. The chat log won't be recorded, but I will probably read out your questions and your comments in the chat so that everybody can hear it. So that will be on the recording. Closed captioning is available, and I'm just going to also write that in the chat. Okay. So if you would like to use the closed captioning to follow along, that is available. There should be a little icon in your control bar. And then if you have questions, because we have such great interest in this workshop, we have a lot of folks registered, and as you can see, we have a lot of folks in the room. I'm going to ask you to use the chat if you have questions throughout the training. Um, if you have comments or responses to my questions, default is going to be the chat. There are going to be some points where we're going to be sharing out from some activities where I'm going to see, is there someone who'd like to come off mute and share some thoughts? I'll invite you to do that. And I'm just going to ask that you raise your hand when we're doing that. But like I said, default for most stuff, it's going to be chat engagement. If you do have any uh, tech issues with Zoom or it's not working for you, you can try chatting me in the chat, or you can send an email to Santa Clara CoC at homebaseccc.org. And one of my colleagues will see that and we'll try to get you some Zoom tech support as much as we can. Okay. We're going to do introductions. As you all do your introductions in your chat, I will introduce myself and explain why I've been talking to you for the last couple of minutes. But I'd love to get to know you all and see who's in the room with us. We're going to start with just a light introduction. So, your name, if you're affiliated with an organization or a group and you'd like to let us know that, love to know that. And if you'd like to share your pronouns, absolutely welcome you to do that. I'll share mine. And I would love to know, what is your favorite color? And please feel free to be as specific as you'd like. For example, right now, my favorite color is that specific gray of the sky in San Francisco right now that is like clouds, but the sun is behind it, so it's sort of glowing, right? Like the Storm's hair in X-Men. That is currently my favorite color. You can be as specific or as general as you'd like with that. All right, so go ahead and put those in the chat, and I will introduce myself as you do that. So hello, my name is Eli Hamilton. My pronouns are he, him, and I am with Homebase. We're a nonprofit. We work with the County Office of Supportive Housing to provide support for the continuum of care in Santa Clara County, for you all as the community of providers, and for some of our lived experience leadership groups and partnerships in the community. I am not a direct service provider right now. I am a trainer, and Homebase doesn't provide direct services. We provide support for you all who provide direct services. I've been working with supportive housing providers and rapid rehousing providers like you all for about 12 years now. And a lot of what I'm sharing in this training is actually coming from you all. Maybe not you specifically, but the wisdom and the experience of rapid rehousing providers. And we're also going to be sharing at the end some of the good resources that we based this content on. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit about Homebase, and thank you so much for introductions in the chat. It's good to see you all. Some very familiar names and faces. Hello, everyone, and also some folks I've never met before. So it's really good to see y'all. Thank you for being here. Okay, I really encourage y'all to check out the chat and see who else is in the room. Maybe you'll see some colleagues you work with every day. Maybe you'll see some colleagues you haven't seen in a bit. Okay. So now that we've done some introductions, we're going to start just by talking about what is rapid rehousing. Something that most of you all do. Um, but what is it? What is it as a model? What is it meant to do? What do we know about rapid rehousing as big picture? So rapid rehousing is a program type. It's a program model. It's a type of funding. It's a way funding is set up. And the thing that rapid rehousing is designed to do is to help people find housing, pay for housing, and stay in housing, right? That is the ultimate goal of rapid rehousing. You don't have to retain this slide. I'm just giving this to you because the next few slides are I'm going to be sort of summarizing some takeaways from some of the research about rapid rehousing. This is a program model that has been researched in different ways, small scale in specific communities, large scale based on data that's provided to the federal government. I went through recently just a scan of some of the research to see what do we know nationally about rapid rehousing. So that's where the next few slides are coming from. What does this research say? It shows that housing placements out of rapid rehousing are pretty consistently pretty high. That just means when people leave a rapid rehousing program, the majority of them tend to be in housing at that point. What does high mean? It means anywhere from, 70 to 90%. Um, Varies by community, but housing placements are high as compared to having no support, having shelter only, and in most places having a transitional housing program. So housing placements are high, and returns to the homeless system of care are relatively low, right? Anytime someone goes through one of our supportive housing programs and then has the experience of losing housing again, that hits us hard, right? It's always going to, and it can be a really an experience of like a frustrating experience, an experience that makes people want to disengage from supports. And so every time we we hear about that, that's going to have a big impact. But if we look at the numbers, rapid rehousing is relatively successful at preventing that, um, even at the 1 year mark or the 2 year mark. So, as far as we can see, rapid rehousing puts people in housing. And for the majority of folks, they're going to be in housing for 1 or 2 years at least after that. Well, we don't see. We see that employment and income change does happen, but it's usually pretty modest, and not everybody sees that. We see that family stability challenges, right? The stability challenges a household faces often remain high after rapid rehousing. And housing instability, meaning people move around, right? We still people see people needing to leave where they are and find a new apartment. So returns to being unhoused don't necessarily happen at a high rate, but this type of housing instability where, someone hasn't yet found their permanent home, they can't afford the unit that they're in, they have to move somewhere else, or things happen, they have to move around, find new housing. That still happens quite a bit. And what we also see in the research, a big takeaway is the design of the program, how it works, how services are offered, and the housing market both matter. They both impact outcomes. So I'd like to stop and check in there. Is there anything on this slide that surprises you to see, or anything that doesn't surprise you? You're like, yeah, just go ahead and share in the chat. If you prefer to share something that like, oh, I'm surprised at this, or like, yeah, this really aligns with my experience. Give you a minute to think about that and chime in the chat. Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Kednal, and let me know if I'm not saying that name right. Surprised to see that housing instability remains high. Yeah. Yeah, and that specifically, as I said in the data, that's about people moving around, right? They're not necessarily at the address they were at when they left the program. Kidnail, thank you. Any other thoughts? Compare these statements to your experience in rapid rehousing, your personal experience with the model. Mm. Yeah, so Nayeli, I think you're calling out like there are some root causes of housing instability that rapid rehousing isn't going to fully address, right? The employment gains are often modest, family challenges remain high. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, right. Yeah, thanks, Yurtsa and Denise. Sort of similar areas, right? Employment and income gains. So what this is saying, and again, this is not data about this community. This is just general like research on rapid rehousing. So it's interesting, but it's not necessarily telling us a story about our community. But in general, um, employment, like people do increase income just across the board, statistically speaking, if you look at the numbers. Um, Rapid rehousing can help people increase their income, but it doesn't usually help people increase their income a lot. It's not moving people from sort of a one income bracket to a much higher income bracket. It's which means like translating that, like we're not necessarily going to see people getting to a comfortable, stable living wage while they're in a rapid rehousing program. Um, I think that makes sense based on what the model looks like and the length of the model and how difficult it is to get to a comfortable long-term living wage. So it's just about, is that responsive to the question? Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Yeah, Beverly. So you're calling out the data doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. That's always true. Absolutely. Like we can never know like everything, right? Data is limited. People consider certain things successes or not successes that we might not agree with. Yeah, really good point. All right, so let's just for time. So we looked at the research. I brought that in for a reason because I think it's important to sort of set our expectations, just your expectations for yourselves and your programs. Rapid rehousing does reduce the length of time that people are unhoused. If someone is in a rapid rehousing program that gets them into housing, they're no longer unhoused. That in itself is important and a win. It minimizes those negative impacts of being unhoused. You get someone is in housing, right? They're not experiencing those negative impacts of not being in housing. That is huge. And it really does being in housing, being feeling like you're in a safe space, having a door to close, all of that stuff we know helps people access resources and other systems and things that they need to further their stability goals and improve their well-being in other ways, right? So that just that fact of housing helps people start working on and like getting resources and support for all of the other things that are making that housing unstable. Income, health, family relationships, things like that. We cannot expect rapid rehousing to change the economic and housing market realities of our community. Rapid rehousing is not built to be a tool to eliminate poverty in our community. It doesn't create additional affordable housing units. It doesn't ensure that people moving forward are not going to be rent burdened, right? And it doesn't stop that housing mobility. Rapid rehousing on its own cannot do those things. That's why we have a full system, right? That's working on things like increasing affordable housing units. And, it's why we have advocacy working for raising minimum wages. It's why we have, we as a community, we push for more employment program supports because rapid rehousing on its own is a response to a specific crisis someone is in, which is houselessness. I just want to welcome folks who are joining us. We are starting with a little bit of a level setting about rapid rehousing. So, what that means is in rapid rehousing programs, what do we need to focus on then? If this is what rapid rehousing, the scope of rapid rehousing is, it means you're focusing on what's going to give this person or this family I'm working with the highest likelihood of the greatest stability, right? What's going to set this person or this family up for the best chance at the best long-term outcome. And you are not necessarily going to be around for the long-term outcome. You're looking like especially when you're winding up a program, you're looking to, okay, what is this going to look like when this program support is not here? Resource connections outside of your program, connecting people, making sure they understand if you are about to lose your housing in the future, this is how you contact the homelessness prevention system. If you need support paying for food in the future, this is a resource where you can get free food or help pay for food. If you like lose your health insurance, this is like resources for that. Places for people to go, resources for people to reach out to in case of future crisis. Thinking broadly about housing options, and then income, because it's hard to make a change, it helps to start talking about income early and making that sort of a central part of the conversation in addition to housing. So I like to start any rapid rehousing workshop going over some of these concepts and some of this sort of background because we're going to be talking about housing stability planning. And this is why. Housing stability planning is such a key part of rapid rehousing services and supports because rapid rehousing is about housing. It is about getting someone in that housing because that creates a foundation of increased stability. And then it's about helping someone access resources that are going to support all of the areas of their life that are connected to their housing. Because again, rapid rehousing is about primarily obtaining housing and then staying in that housing. Any questions or just thoughts that are coming to your mind about that as I switch to our next set of slides? Any takeaways, anything you'd push back on, or any questions? Mm. Yeah, great question, Justin. I mean, I would put that question back to you all. I think what the research shows is that it can address um, income to a certain extent, right? Rapid rehousing can help people increase their income, right? That's a big thing that rapid rehousing can do. But what do we understand as addressing poverty, right? What would it take for someone who is in undergoing a lot of economic financial stress, a lot of financial insecurity? What does that actually take in our current system for someone to not have that financial stress, right? To not have that financial insecurity? I think that's a step. That's a step into financial security that rapid rehousing isn't always going to be able to do. It's not something we need to rely on rapid rehousing to do. There need to be other resources, other advocacy in the community. So I think no, rapid rehousing isn't a tool that's usually going to address financial instability. But I'm interested in what you all would think about that. Yeah. So Kalia is pointing out, yeah, housing programs, in the housing programs Kalia works with, we like to encourage folks to save while you're helping them with rent so they can take a step towards financial security. That's an excellent strategy. Yeah. If that's something that you can help folks make possible. Yeah. Yeah. There are definitely tools and like just having help paying rent and having someone working with you to plan is a huge support. I don't want to undermine that. And it can really, really help folks with their financial stability. Yeah. Thank you, Richmond. This is huge, I think, what you're calling out in the chat. It can be a tool because it will decrease blood pressure. Living in fear based on thoughts of tomorrow, which will allow someone to think and plan their best mood. Absolutely. That space to breathe, to not be an immediate crisis. As a human, that's so important to any, setting of goals or reaching of goals. Yeah. Yep. more financial management skills and workshop within the agencies. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are a lot of uh, a lot of strategies you all are using to make rapid rehousing as impactful as possible. One of those strategies is planning, housing stability planning. So the rest of this session is going to be focused on what is a housing stability plan specifically, and what are the steps to creating one. So we're going to talk about what is a housing stability plan, what are some principles that we would recommend you keep in mind, the who, the when, the why of a housing stability plan, and then we're going to walk through some of the steps to creating a housing stability plan. A couple of notes. There are 3 activities in this training that involve breakout groups. I'm saying that up front because um, I know that breakout groups are not everybody's favorite. They're not always my favorite. But we do these breakout groups because practice is important. We're going to be covering a lot of information in this training, and we know that human brains don't absorb information just by hearing it. So the practice is actually a really important part of learning. I would encourage you all to stay and participate in the breakout groups. I would also ask that if you don't plan to participate in a breakout group, that you leave the Zoom um, before we start the breakouts so that I know how many people are going to be in each breakout room. What I'm trying to avoid is we're having a breakout activity and there's 2 people in the room that are actually there and 5 people who have stepped away from their computers because they don't want to do a breakout. So this is going to be an interactive training. And if that's not something you're in a place to do, I'm just going to ask that you step out of the Zoom so that I know that when we get to that point. Any questions about that? Okay. So we're going to start with an activity. This is a self-reflection activity. We won't go into a breakout for this. And I'm gonna, I'm gonna shut down my video for 3 minutes. Um, and we're just gonna take 3 quiet minutes to think about these questions, a self-reflection. What strengths do you bring to your work? What makes you feel successful in your role? Is it seeing certain outcomes? Is it being able to do certain things? What are some strengths that you see rapid rehousing participants bringing? And then what do you hope that you take from this training? So those are the reflection questions. When we come back after this activity, I'm not going to ask you to share your reflections. That's just for you. But I am going to ask you to share what is your role with rapid rehousing, or what other work are you doing if you're not in a rapid rehousing program? So we're going to do a reflection, and then we're just going to do a check-in about what role is everybody playing in these programs. Okay, so I'm going to start our 3 minutes of personal reflection, and we'll be back at lost my clock. And we'll be back at 11:30, let's say, from that reflection.
Ok, gracias, Leti.
Okay, folks, come on back. I hope you enjoyed that brief break from listening to my voice. And I hope that you got some value out of that self-reflection activity, especially with the work that you all do, being high pressure. There's a lot going on. Um, this the type, like giving yourself the ability and the permission to take a minute to think and to reflect on, you know, fundamental questions like this can be a valuable tool in your practice. So I'd like to welcome everybody back to engaging in the training by please just let us know in the chat what's your role in a rapid rehousing program if you have one. And if not, maybe share like what work do you do or why are you interested in this training? Thanks, John. We have an employment specialist in the room. We love it. Yeah, thank you. Got housing specialist, case manager. Thanks for being here, Juan. We appreciate it. Housing case manager. Yeah, housing specialists. Oh, I'm so glad to see a homelessness prevention system friend here. Thank you so much for joining. Yeah, yeah, lots of homelessness prevention system folks. Yeah, so rapid rehousing, homelessness prevention, the work that you all do is so similar. It's, you know, often helping people find a new um, housing situation or helping people figure out how to remain stable in their housing situation. Very parallel. Yeah. Thank you all so much. We have some peer specialists here, which I really appreciate you being here. Super important roles in the system. And housing navigators. Excellent. All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. That really helps me understand who we are in this training. All right. So, housing stability planning. The central focus of a housing stability plan is resolving that crisis of houselessness, right? The first thing you're trying to do is make a plan that's going to help someone get and move into permanent housing. So this is essentially a housing first approach. The idea being we are going to start by saying, okay, your crisis right now, your one of your main crises that we can help you with is you don't have housing. Let's address that and make that one of our first focuses. And it's also, right, that's not where we stop in any housing first approach. We just stop by helping someone find an apartment. We take a strengths-based approach that helps someone figure out how am I going to stay in this housing? What are the barriers now to me staying in the housing? So we start with obtaining housing, and then we move to what are the barriers to my housing stability? This is really individualized from client to client. That's why y'all's work is so important and so demanding because there isn't a set of steps you're going to follow with every participant. It really is a problem solving, a human engagement activity. Um, really encourage in housing stability planning a really client-centered approach, right? This is this person's housing situation and understanding what are this person's goals and a lot and like helping that person find choice and find agency and empowerment. Those are things that just as humans we need, right? It's a sort of psychological fact about humans that if we're in a situation that we don't feel that we chose, that was pushed on us, we're just much less likely to be successful in that situation or to want to engage with, opportunities and supports. So client choice, um, working with client strengths, empowering the folks you're working with, and making sure that your approach is individual and flexible throughout the sort of creating a housing stability plan. So the what, the who, and the when. What what makes a housing stability plan different from other case plans, right? There's a lot of different types of planning that you could do with a participant. It's the focus on housing barriers, right? It's always going to come back to, is this tied to a housing barrier? Is this barrier or this goal tied to helping someone find housing or helping someone stay? And this is going to evolve, right? The housing stability planning process is going to continue. You don't just make a plan and that's your one plan. Because at the beginning, you're really going to be focused on getting housing, overcoming barriers to actually getting a lease or finding a unit. And then once someone is housed, that ongoing planning and ongoing goal setting is to find, the resources and support someone is going to need to address their barriers to keeping that housing. That's the what. This means that the goal of housing stability is, right, getting into permanent housing. And then it's things like, this person is going to be able to afford their rent and they're going to be able to pay rent on time. And that's easier said than done, right? There's a lot of reasons why it's hard for human beings to do things by a certain date. Like, you know, uh, for example, at work, I ask my boss for a lot of different supports to make sure I make my deadlines at work. I can't just, as a person, I'm not the kind of person who can have a deadline and then just make myself meet it, right? That's true of a lot of humans. So when we talk about paying rent, the support that you're providing is not just the ability to pay rent and getting folks income in that place. It is what supports do you as a person are you going to need to actually get that rent check on the date it needs to be there. Understanding and following the terms of a lease, meeting other housing requirements, right? So we're not just talking about getting housing, we're talking about housing focused long-term stability. Who is developing a housing stability plan? It is usually the case manager, sometimes a case manager slash housing specialist. There's different ways to split up those roles, but it's a staff support and the household or the person that you're working with. So the who that develops the plan, it's really collaborative between you all as staff and support roles and the person who is making the plan. The participant, right, that individual should be leading that process when it comes to setting housing goals, right? You're going to bring a lot of value in helping someone think through how do you get to a goal? What are the resources? What are the action steps you need to take? But setting the goals, that should be really participant driven. And the case manager is going to support on that follow through, as I said. When do you create the plan? When does the participant create the plan? We encourage the sooner, the better. What right away means may vary from person to person. As someone rightly said in the chat, like an emotional, there is a mental impact of being in crisis. There is a mental and emotional impact of experiencing trauma. When we say right away, doesn't mean literally day one, the first time you meet someone, you're having them sit down and answer a bunch of questions about their housing barriers. But it does mean even before you enroll someone, you want to start talking about, hey, one of the things we do is housing stability planning. Let me explain to you a little bit about what that will look like. so that they know that that's going to be a focus. And then as soon as that person is willing and able to really meaningfully engage, you're starting that housing stability planning process. And why? I think this is probably the easiest question to answer. Um, it's hard to get to a place if you don't know how you're going to get there. If we don't have a plan that sets clear goals, you and the participant aren't going to have a shared vision of what support they're going to need. Um, Trying to get, you know, 50 miles down the road is a lot harder if you don't know what mile 5 and mile 10 and mile 23 are going to look like. And then it really helps lay out for everybody, not just where you're trying to get, but what your roles are going to be, right? What is the participant's responsibility to move forward, and what is your responsibility? And then you can come back and check, like, hey, did that, like, were you able to meet the tasks that we assigned to you as a participant? Is there more support you need from me in this next round of action steps? Okay. So we're about to get into the actual steps, right? The rest of this training is, so how do we do this? But I want to pause there. I just want to check in with you all. Um, in your work, in your role, do you work on housing stability planning with folks? And does this sort of match the approach that you're taking so far, right? Does this resonate? Does this match what your experience is? Is there anything that you would add about housing stability planning? Give you a little time to share that in the chat. And if you don't answer anything else, I'd love to hear, do you do housing stability planning? Thank you so much for folks. Thank you, Maricela. Thank you, Beatrice, for responding to that question. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. So it seems like this is familiar to a lot of folks in the training today. Cool. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Great, Natalie. Thank you. Yep. Stability plan comes right after the intake assessment. Yeah. It should be updated throughout the process as well. Amazing. Excellent. So we have a lot of folks here. Great. Every quarter and as needed. Thanks. Thanks for that. Awesome. So we have a lot of folks with experience of hands-on housing stability planning. As I said, we're going to be doing breakouts, and I'm going to be, interactive, asking questions. A big part of the value of a big training like this is peer sharing, you all learning from each other. So I'm really grateful to have a bunch of folks with great experience. Okay. So we're going to go through we're actually going to go through steps 1, 2, and 3 in this series. So assessment of housing barriers and strengths, goal setting and action planning, supporting long-term housing stability, the monitoring progress, and the follow-up, we are not going to get into in depth today. We'll go through over steps 1, 2, and 3. Starting with assessing housing preferences, barriers, and client strengths. So I saw a couple folks saying, yep, we start this right after the intake assessment. I think that's really good. That's one of the things I like to point out is, your assessment of housing barriers and strengths is maybe an additional assessment that you're doing, right? You may do a separate assessment of vulnerability or overall well-being. But having a process that you do that's specifically focused on assessing housing needs and housing barriers is really important. And for each of these steps, we're going to start with a checklist. We love a checklist at Homebase because, uh, it's again, our human brains are beautiful and wonderful and powerful, and they're also limited. So checklists help us put key information and key benchmarks in a place that, a paper isn't going to forget, like a human brain might. So having a checklist for certain parts of the process can be helpful. You can say, okay, I did this, I did this. Oop, I forgot that part, right? So we're going to walk through each of these pieces of doing a housing barriers assessment, explaining the process and goals, talking to the person, discussing what are your preferences, what's your housing history, Getting some information from external sources like credit reports or record checks for evictions, and then using all of that information to work with the participant to identify their strengths and barriers. Always start with explaining, right? And making sure that every step of this process makes sense for the participant because it is their housing plan and their housing planning process. So even before you begin the assessment, it can be really helpful to set an expectation, really powerfully communicate, message to a new participant or even someone who hasn't enrolled yet, someone you're reaching out to and saying, hey, you got a referral to this program. I'd love to tell you about it. Starting by saying, or in that, like even pre-enrollment conversations, talking about permanent housing is the main goal of this program. And one of the tools we use is housing stability planning, talking a little bit about what that looks like. And then having, different kinds of messaging or markers for folks as they start the program, that housing is the focus of this program. Um, that could be something like, your flyers and information are all like talking about housing. Um, Things on your bulletin boards, the materials, the intake paperwork, having a lot of cues to someone saying, yeah, okay, I remember this is a housing focus thing. This is a housing focus thing. Because that really helps set the expectation of, well, this is why we're doing this housing stability planning process right now, because this is how we get to housing. And then while you're doing the assessment, continue to explain the process, provide information, and check in with the participant. Does this make sense? Like, does this feel okay? Do you have concerns about this? You know, how is this stressful? Like, how are you doing with this, right? Um, One of the rules of thumb that I like to go by, I don't do it as much in trainings because a lot of it is talking and presenting, is when I'm explaining something to any other human being, I try not to talk for more than like a minute at a time before I'm giving someone a pause, space. Because human brains don't just hear something and we understand it immediately, right? If I'm talking like this and I'm giving you a lot of information and, I can tell you that my birthday is on April 14th and my brother is one of my favorite people in the world. And when I go outside, the first thing I do is I look up because I love the sky, right? It's a lot of it's a lot of concepts, it's a lot of information without me giving you a pause in between for your brain to think about that information. Because it's the actual thinking about the information that gets it into the brain. So when you're explaining something, right, you want to make sure you can slow down, give yourself the time, give the person you're talking to the time to say, like, okay, this is a little bit about a little bit of the explanation, not the whole thing at once. This is a little bit. Just leave some space. Ask a follow-up question. Like, does that make sense? Or how does that feel to you? Do you have questions? And then give the next part of the explanation. And always make sure that you're including in this explanation, checking in about concerns that they may have. And then what does this assessment look like? So, designed to collect information from folks about their past living situations to identify any barriers that might show up there. Understanding that housing history is really important. It can help sort of highlight issues that are going to keep people from being able to like have a successful application to housing, right? Really bad credit is going to make it harder for a landlord to say, yeah, I'm going to rent to this person. Knowing about that is important because you're going to want to do some planning about addressing that barrier. Um, and just knowing about other things that have been challenging in the past for someone in housing, like issues paying rent on time, conflicts with neighbors or roommates, things like that that can make someone feel like a little more hesitant, a little more ambivalent about housing, right? I don't trust I'm going to stay in this housing because my neighbors are always picking fights with me, right? That's a barrier, and knowing that that's a pattern can be helpful in long-term planning. And then things like, does this person have an animal companion that's really important to them? Does this person need reasonable accommodations? All of that can impact housing planning. So that housing history can really help understand like what's the ideal situation for this person. What's worked in the past, what's not worked, and then that can lead into identifying like what are the this person's preferences and what are this person's goals, right? What hasn't worked, what has worked. So what do you want this time? What are we looking for? Um, it's it's important, I think, to make sure that you are keeping in mind, like on the one hand, you wanna you want to get a sense of that ideal situation, but also to recognize that an ideal situation is not necessarily going to happen, right? Nobody, when you're doing a housing search, nobody finds their perfect apartment unit in their price range with everything that they want. That's just a dream, unless you're fabulously wealthy. Um, so there are there are strategies that you can use to help prepare a participant for that kind of compromise that can need to happen. And I'm going to do one more slide and then take a break to get some of your thoughts and responses. So the core of, yeah, thanks, Justin. Yeah, that's exactly the kind of check-in I want to have after this slide. Yeah. Um, so the core of this assessment, right, the purpose of the assessment is to get at the client's like primary barriers and primary strengths. There are a lot of tools that like different agencies use different tools for this, different kinds of questionnaires or sort of inventories that case managers can go through. We really recommend having a specific, like an objective assessment, meaning questions that are written down that all case managers are using and asking every participant. This can be really important, right? Having that like this is the set of things, the set of questions I'm asking, the way I'm assessing these needs. The reason we recommend that is that, especially if you are an expert in this area, especially if you've been doing this work for a long time, it can be so easy to fall into like, oh, I've seen this type of situation before. I know what this person probably needs, right? I'm seeing certain things like I'm already picturing the housing plan for this person. Those kinds of assumptions that come from your knowledge and expertise, but really don't help it in like engaging the client, really don't help in making sure the plan feels specific to them and is like actually addressing their barriers, right? That can be a block. It can prevent us from actually seeing and hearing what this person's needs are. So having that set of questions that you're asking every participant, you're listening to their answers, can help keep that open mind and avoid those assumptions. And at the minimum, I think a housing assessment should assess these things. What are current resources? You're going to ask about income, work experience, social network. What has led or could lead to the client's housing? What actions, what behaviors, or what situations led to the client's housing crisis and have led to housing instability in the past? What other barriers are keeping someone from being stable in housing? What support they probably need? And how comfortable and how confident does this person feel addressing solve problems, finding services themselves, and or with support? So I'm going to pause there. Based on y'all's experience doing housing stability planning, um, I'm curious to hear, does this match up with the kind of assessment of strengths and barriers, assessment of housing need that y'all are doing? Yeah, and I'd love to hear anything more you'd like to share about how do you do this type of assessment? What does that look like for you all? Cool. Seeing some yes, absolutely. Yeah, and at this point, if you'd like to come off mute, if typing is not quick for you, go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to share a little bit more about like how do you do housing needs assessment? What does that look like for you? can type that in the chat or you can raise your hand. Hmm. Yeah, I'm seeing a standard assessment you go through with each new client. Yeah, that's really interesting. We've had some clients that will tell us they aren't ready after discussing the plan. Yeah. Yeah, I'm wondering if that's something other folks hear. Just like you're going through a plan and then people are saying, "Oh, this feels like I'm not ready to tackle this right now." And what would you do in in that situation? Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, talking about, if somebody's coming in and you're going through the planning process and they say, I can't do this right now. Or you go through the planning process and then you find the person isn't following through on their part of the steps. What are some things you might try at those points? There's some strategies.
Small goals, near future goals versus a 6 month goals and then yearly goals. But I've only been a case manager for R&R for a short time period. But in the success plans that I set through, we call them success plans. We kind of try to clean up the stuff in their life. So when they are back at 100% independence, their credits cleaned up, stuff like that. We try to reset their whole life. But I definitely like the in-depth thing about what got them there because what you're doing is you're focusing on the micro data instead of the macro. The
Yeah.
macro is what's happening right now, what the problems are, but the micro data, you need to add up the micros, it becomes one big macro event. So you're focusing on all the micro stuff that got them to where they are right now in the present tense.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Richmond. Yeah, the tiny steps, breaking things down. Um, and I see Juan reminding us that, yeah, small steps are good, should be client driven, and should always be working towards housing stability. And I'm seeing Juan highlight timelines. Yeah, all of those things, right? None of these things individually is necessarily going to just fix the block that someone is having. But breaking things down into small, achievable steps. Maybe it's that this this step is too intimidating right now. But what's the very first part of this? Can we break it down to the very next step that the participant can do? Seeing connecting to resources that feel most urgent to them at that time. Sometimes a barrier to housing stability is someone can't focus on housing stability right now because they have another urgent crisis that is more urgent, right? Maybe that is like immediate physical reactions to trauma. Maybe that is needing feelings of safety because of domestic violence. Sometimes that is the case. So identifying where that's the case, but that shouldn't be the default, right? Like rapid rehousing, the goal is housing stability. And so you want to start with, hey, what are your barriers to housing? Um, Motivational interviewing, I love that. Yeah, that's a really great tool if you can get that training, meeting them halfway. Motivational interviewing is a really great tool for making sure that a planning process is participant-centered and participant-led, which again, that can increase engagement and can increase buy-in. Someone feels like you've given me this homework. Um, Folks are much less likely to follow through than if it's, I identified this as important and I know how to do it and I feel supported to do it. Yep. Identify the mini barriers that may be interfering with addressing the bigger barriers. Yeah, figuring out what is the block here? What's making this hard? Maybe you like you don't have transportation. Maybe you couldn't do this because you're anxious in social situations. Like what are the blocks? Yeah, assessing immediate needs, talking out what they may feel. That can work. Yeah, yeah. Sometimes it's a really good strategy to just be like, yeah, it seems like this has been a hard couple weeks. You weren't able to get to these goals. That's okay. Let's talk about why. Like, how are you feeling right now? Like, what's up? How are you feeling about these next steps? Um, yeah. So just building that relationship be helpful. Okay. So we are going to um, talk about common barriers. We're going to talk about common strengths, and then we're going to move to our first breakout room activity. So these are some really common barriers to housing that we see. I'm sure you've seen a lot of others, and we've just talked about like these are some big blocks. Sometimes there's like smaller obstacles, smaller barriers, right? What are the immediate barriers? Things like, of course, economic stuff, income, credit history, sporadic employment history, having debt. Sometimes it's, substance use, problematic substance use or substance abuse. Sometimes it can be just a long history of being unhoused, which can make like finding housing and moving into housing be a little bit like scary and intimidating in itself. And I've talked to a lot of folks who have described like actually getting into housing was destabilizing for me. I built a community outside. I knew how that worked, and I wanted to be inside. I wanted to be housed. But when I got there, I felt alone. I wasn't connected to my support networks. Um, Things like, unfortunately, limited English proficiency. Most things in this country, like rent applications, housing, program applications, they're in English. So being able to provide interpretation or translation. Um, and then, age, right? We know that a lot of landlords are less interested in renting to folks who are relatively young, under 18, but even, 18 to 25, we know that just pure age or perception of age can be a barrier. And then strengths, right? Sometimes you can get positive references from past landlords, from employers, from community members. Sometimes that can be really compelling to a certain type of landlord. If someone does have experience as a tenant, even if that experience wasn't perfect, um, they have that experience. They know some things that work and don't work for them. So highlighting that for them, like messaging that to the person is like, it's good that you had this experience, even if it wasn't all good. Having any work experience, education, or skills. This can even mean non-formal work experience, right? Highlighting for folks, look, yeah, you maybe haven't had a lot of formal employment you could put on a resume, but you have shown up for as a caregiver for your parent or a child, like emphasizing for a person, you have the skills to set goals. You have the skills to, take on responsibility, and you have survived. That in itself is an experience of like what a job would be, in that it takes goal setting, it takes initiative, it takes energy, it takes commitment. Ability to build rapport, right? Just being, a people person. Um, Having any income, having any employment, any support that folks have socially, social supports, just figuring out any type of like, just highlighting again their experience with problem solving, navigating systems. All of these things can be strengths that make the person feel empowered, and can also, some of them can be strengths that you can message to, or they can message to landlords. Okay. So what you want to do with this assessment, you're using this assessment to really focus the plan, right? The assessment is all about figuring out what are the barriers we need to plan towards? What are the strengths that we can put into our plan, right? And so your assessment time is focusing that housing plan. Barriers to permanent housing. So always coming back to this thing we're talking about. Is this directly connected, preventing this person from getting into housing right now? Or later on in the plan, is this something that's really affecting their ability to remain housed? Because for a rapid rehousing program, right, there's that is the main focus. That is the value that you're providing. Um, and then coming back, right? I think somebody in the chat has also already mentioned this. Revisiting and revising, right? You want to come back to something pretty regularly. Ideally, this plan for a lot of the rapid rehousing time is a really living, active thing that you're co-building with someone. Like as you check in about, well, how did the last 2 weeks go with the steps we had? If they happened, you're moving on to the next part of the plan. If they didn't happen, you're revising that plan because, your timeline is revised. Okay. So this is our first breakout activity. I'm going to use the next probably 5 minutes to describe and explain the activity. And then I'll put you into breakout groups of 7 people. And you'll have 15 minutes in those breakout groups to take a look at a housing assessment and use that assessment to identify some barriers that this person has and some strengths that this person has. The um the Let me show you what you're going to have. Here we go. So what your group will have, everybody's going to have the same scenario. I'm going to put a link where you'll be able to access this document. It is a made-up participant, a made-up person, and it's the housing assessment questions and answers. Right? So we'll put you in your breakout rooms. What I would recommend is take a minute to introduce yourselves to each other, and then take 2 or 3 minutes for everybody to read through this assessment on their own, right? You're going to need that time. You're not going to be able to just jump in and start talking. And then once everybody's had a chance to read through this fake assessment, together you're going to be talking about, okay, what do we see as what is jumping out as barriers for this client, housing specific related barriers? And then what are we seeing show up as some strengths that this participant is bringing? And that will be the discussion. Oh, sorry. I didn't actually switch my screen share. I apologize. Here we go. This is what you should have been seeing. Sorry about that. This is the document that you'll have access to. Right. So again, Sam Smith, it's not the actual singer, I don't think. It's a made up person, made up assessment questions and answers. So you can see there's quite a few of them. So that's why I'm saying like, yeah, take some time to introduce yourselves to each other and then give yourselves some time to just let everybody read through. But the bulk of the 15 minutes is going to be a group discussion, coming up with like, hey, what are the barriers we see here and what are the strengths? So any questions about that? Okay. It's like that activity seems pretty clear. Okay. Thank you, Marcella. Okay. Then I'm also going to encourage you all. This is a pretty straightforward discussion you're going to be having, but I would encourage you all to have one person, if someone could volunteer, to keep track of time for your group. You don't have to like, set a timer or whatever. Just be a little bit aware of like, okay, we we've been chatting and introducing ourselves to each other for 5 minutes now. We should probably stop that and move on to reading the actual document, right? And like checking in after a couple of minutes. Hey, is everybody done or do people need more time? Just light, like making sure the group is staying aware of time, and calling folks back to the activity if needed. And then if another person could volunteer to just report out to the larger group after the breakout. Um, when you get the I'm going to give you a link to that assessment. When you get that link, you should be able to click it and download this Word document. So at least one person should download that Word document and type notes in it because we're going to ask someone to share out. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay. I put a link to this document, the housing assessment document in the chat. I'm going to give you all a chance to download that or open up the link. Please let me know if the link is not working as I set up the breakout rooms. And this is where, if you are not going to participate in the breakout room, I would appreciate you. Thank you, Yuritsa, for confirming that that's working. You hopping off the Zoom for the next 15 minutes so that we don't have a bunch of breakout rooms full of ghosts. 40 people. Okay. Thank you all. Seeing that happening. Okay, so you should still have access to that link in the chat when I put you in breakout rooms. Um, Once you are in the breakout room, if there's a problem, right? If you happen to be the only person in this breakout room who is talking, um, or if, yeah, we're not in the breakout rooms yet, Richmond, if that's what you're looking for. But this is the document you're going to need. Once you're, or if you have any problems or questions, right? There should be a button that says ask for help or something like that. If you click that, it'll send me a message. I can pop in. So if you need help or something's weird or not working, let me know sooner rather than later so it doesn't eat into your activity time. Okay. And with that, uh, let me just make sure I have this set up right. Okay, with that, I am going to open breakout rooms. They're going to be open for 15 minutes, and then you'll get a notification of a 30-second countdown timer before it will pull you automatically back in. And I will see you soon. Welcome back. Everybody will be magically teleported back in about 5 seconds. We'll get started. You can pull your souls out of the breakout rooms and into the main room. Okay.
Oh, we were on a roll.
Ah,
Yes, I'm like
We
starting
need
to
we
write
need we need
now.
we need 5 more minutes. Can we go
I
fast?
know. I'm writing or typing away as I was hearing
We
and it
could we
didn't
weren't
finish.
we weren't able to type out, so we were actually just writing.
yeah, that's totally good. I love to hear that. Sometimes people come back from a breakout room and it's like, thank you so much for rescuing me from having to do work. Sometimes it's like, oh, that was so good. Can we do it for 30
More.
minutes?
Um, Ellie,
Yeah.
I was asking the my colleague in our breakout room if their organization have this housing assessment because this is wonderful. Is
Mm.
this something that home base have? Because when we work HPS, we don't have this to work with, so we just like base it upon what we know, what the client tells us. But having something like what you have presented here for us is very methodical and logical.
Yeah. In our follow-up for this training, for everybody who registered, we'll send these activities, so you'll get literally that version. And then we also have a list of resources that have other examples of assessments. So all of that will come in a follow-up email. I hope that's helpful.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Um, all right. So I'd love to hear uh, either in the chat, that's more comfortable, or you can like come off mute. The representative from each group just sharing some highlights. I want to keep it pretty short, but just some highlights of the really rich conversation I'm sure that you all had. Who'd like to share first? Or you can type in the chat.
I know that in our group, this is John, we're group one, I believe, but in on his on the weaknesses, basically on what's stopping him from getting a lot was his negative references for housing from landlords. The fact that he has a record that they're looking at, um, no income, hasn't even applied for SSI or disability, um, is doing very minimal side jobs. He has a disability that's affecting him, and the and transportation were some of the ones that stuck out, you know,
Mhm.
and that was just
The
on the
barriers.
barriers. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What about strengths?
Strengths that we were looking at, we hadn't gotten to get to that part, but his willingness, he had a good willingness that he'd be willing to. It's hard to get an individual to say that they want to stay at a place with somebody else,
Mhm.
and he's willing to partner up with that, knowing that's going to help out his income. He has resources, knows how to use the resources. When you talked about his nephew and the church and go, so he knows how to maneuver that part right there.
Yeah.
Um, and that's where we're right there on that part right there.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So you have quite a few barriers, right? So that's going to be the basis of like what resources, what action steps do we need to take? And you have some good strengths to rely on. Is there anything that other groups would add to that? What else? Any other highlights? Anything you'd add?
We would say that he has local family support system and the utilizes the church and the volunteers as support.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he does have a high school diploma, so he does have some education. He does have some social, um, like he does like social. He is social. He likes to have roommates. He likes to have a pet. He does have some work experience and says he could do work here and there, even though it's not stability. It's still something that he knows he can, go out and look to do. And
Yeah.
he does know how to use the transportation of the VTA.
Nice. Anybody else? Any other groups? Would you add anything else or want to reflect on any of the strengths or barriers? Else to add?
I'm not sure if this was mentioned, but he was open to having a roommate. So I thought that was a strength because possibly we could be looking at an SRO as opposed to him getting his own place. It's a little easier. Uh, he doesn't have any formal evictions. He's able to do some work. The relationship with the church could be helpful as a reference or just for support. Um, One of the barriers, I'm not sure if it was mentioned yet, conflict with neighbors. So that's a little bit of a red flag. And he had friends staying over for extended period of time, it sounds like. That could be a barrier.
Mhm.
Owed some back rent. Sometimes that comes up when you apply.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and having that assessment and then being able to have follow-up conversations about things like conflict with neighbors, right? Knowing that that's a potential sort of stumbling block down the road, and being able to, just talk about that explicitly with this person as like, yeah, this has been a struggle in the past. Can we talk about that? What do you think? Like, what do you see as the causes of that, the roots of that, those conflicts, and let's see if we can strategize on how to prevent that in the future. Yeah. Go ahead, Javier.
Yeah, I just wanted to revisit the topic of his strengths and just kind of highlighting that even though he has informal employment, he's willing to go the extra mile and just be a handyman and just do outside, jobs and like under the table, transactions and stuff like that. So that kind of shows you that he's willing to change and like, kind of like progress. So that's good.
Yeah. There's a, hustle is the right word, but there's a yeah, can buckle down and just like make that happen through the work that he's been able to find. And yeah, yeah, it's huge strength. Okay.
I would say one more of the a strength,
Yeah.
like even though he has a disability or back issue or back pain, looking at that, what are the resources and options for that? Would you want to get like, do you have like maybe back surgery, physical therapy, or disability?
Mhm.
Thinking of exploring those options.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yep. Always using those barriers to then lead to, okay, what's the resource there? What's the action step? If and also always coming back to like, how are these barriers directly connected to the housing stability? And starting with the first ones, right? The most immediate obstacles, what's keeping this person from getting into housing right now, and then what's keeping this person from that long-term stability. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to move us to the next step of housing planning. And just like being a case manager, flexibility and tailoring to the group is really important in trainings as well. So I've really appreciated, we have a lot of people here today and a lot of really good engagement. So we are going to cut the last section of this training and we're going to bring it back at the second session of the Rapid Rehousing Workshop because I don't want to try to cram in everything. I wanted to give you all space to breathe and to talk. So we're going to do the unit on goal setting and action planning, and then we're going to wrap up for today. Okay, so in our steps of housing stability planning, we've assessed housing barriers and strengths. The next step is that initial goal setting and action planning. And as you've all brought in, I think you come back. It's an iterative process, right? You come back to the goals, you come back to the action planning over time. But it is a good step too. Okay, so goals of housing stability planning, right? We have at the very top, right? Stable housing. That's what we're looking for, right? And in order to get and support stable housing, right, we're looking to uh, stabilize or increase income. We're looking to stabilize and increase the ability to like pay whatever rent. And part of that can be finding places where the rent you need to pay is lower. And then in order to support that, we got to connect people to what HUD calls, or what the federal government calls mainstream resources, which just means resources that are outside of your rapid rehousing program, that are outside of our homeless specific system of care. Community resources, community-based supports that will, address those other life areas that are affecting housing stability and prevent housing loss in the future. So we have this one main goal, and then we have sort of things that support that. When you're setting housing focused goals in your plan, this should be a very client centered process. You're starting with like, what did the client share in that assessment of strengths and barriers? And it's a conversation, and you are helping to support and guide. You're providing structure, you're providing maybe prompts, but you are not setting these goals. You are not setting the vision for this person. So how do you do that? How do you both make sure this is like participant led, participant driven, but also make sure it stays connected to that main goal of housing stability? One of the big tools that like I hear from folks in your position, from you all, that is really helpful and can be really supportive is motivational interviewing. It's a sort of um, a skill, it's a strategy that there are trainings on that encourages participants to like they set the agenda. It's all about what do we need to talk about? Like what do you see as barriers? And you reflect back what you're hearing from a participant. And it allows folks to reflect and talk about their own desire for change, their own reasons for wanting change. Um, and your role as a motivational interview is mainly to pull that out, not by asking targeted questions or giving suggestions, but just by really reflecting back, like what I'm hearing from you is like this is a challenge in your life. And that prompts someone to continue talking about that. So that wasn't a training on motivational interviewing. I know that not all organizations have the resources to provide or pay for motivational interviewing trainings, but it's something to look out for. It's a tool we encourage because it can really help in that being client-led, client-centered, um, and not sort of having you sort of set the agenda. Okay. Um, okay. So housing focus goals, client-centered, client-led. Checklist. Said we love checklists. For goal setting, you want to make sure you're including short-term goals and you're also including long-term goals. You're breaking down those goals into steps that are actually can be accomplished between meetings. You're saying this is a goal and this is the part of the goal or the part of the step that we're able to do before the next meeting. So if you're meeting with a person every week during the first stages of your program, then those action steps should be small enough that they can be finished within a week reasonably. So the size of the action steps may depend on how often you're meeting. Action steps should be clear, they should be easy to understand, and you should know when they're done. You should be able to know, yes, we checked that off. Clear and easy to understand. That may mean different things for different people that you're working with. If someone has a lot of experience navigating systems and that's one of their strengths, they may need less support from you to understand the steps they're going to need to go through. But someone who has a lot more trouble or less experience navigating systems, they may need things like the steps, the sub steps, broken down much more in much sort of smaller chunks. Like, okay, you need to take this form to this office, right? Okay. Where do you find the form? How do you download a form? Where do you print a form? What does it mean to fully fill out a form? All of those things, like not really assuming that someone's going to need that help, but not assuming they aren't, and letting them direct of like, okay, does this seem doable? Like all these subparts you've got a handle on how to do all of those things. Okay. And then, of course, always specifying roles. Like, what are you going to be doing to support this work? The goal setting and action steps can a lot of times largely be led by the participant, but you are there for a reason. You're there to lend support. And so, figuring out for each person what are the places you can step in, and it's a supportive thing for you to have action steps as well. Okay, so talking a little bit about those roles, the role of the participant, the role of the case manager or mentor or service coordinator. Um, you're going to work together on identifying those action steps, right? The participants really leading goal setting, and the participant is also identifying the priorities. You are working together to identify those action steps. That's a little bit where your expertise starts coming in, right? If this is a goal and this is a high priority goal, you have potentially some of the expertise on, well, these are some of the ways we could get there. These are some options of resources, or this is like uh, how you start with credit repair. You're bringing that information, you're working with the participant to figure out what action steps are feasible for them. And you want to sort of be broad and share all of the options that you know about. because you want to give the human being you're working with an understanding of like not you're not giving them a path they have to walk. You're saying these are some of the ways we could get to the goal. And this also might involve you doing a little research of are there other ways to get to this goal? Maybe talking to someone else in your org, doing some Googling. We don't expect you to know all the resources or systems out there. And then you're going to help that person set the uh, set the steps that they're going to take. Okay. There's a lot of text on here. We're not going to read all of it. It's not important. You'll get these slides after. But the takeaway is short-term and long-term goals. It is good to have both. You should have both because you're looking at what are our immediate obstacles, and then what do we know you're going to need to do to get to sort of housing stability. And you want to know if you're setting a goal, is this short term? Should we expect to do this relatively quickly? Or is this going to be a long-term goal? Are we going to need to break this up into shorter action items and just set expectations about like, this isn't going to happen immediately. This is a longer term process. So we've talked about goal setting. Let's talk about action steps. We got really great peer sharing earlier about, yeah, breaking down goals into bite-sized action steps with concrete timelines. You want to know this is what we're trying to accomplish, and this is when we want to accomplish it by. Often, our next meeting date is a good time, is a good way to set timelines. But also keeping in mind, like, if you're going to set a timeline, you have to make sure that action step is doable in that timeline. I'm going to clearly identify who is doing the action step, right? This is something that the participant has agreed to. You want to make sure that they understand and they remember that that's something that they sort of signed on to do. And check, right? This is another role, the big part of your role is just you can be the person who's constantly reflecting back to how is this action step taking us towards housing or towards housing stability? How is this tied to housing? Creative problem solving is I think the main thing that you all do. It's your main superpower. We have a fun activity we sometimes do with rapid rehousing providers that's just about problem solving tricky situations. It's something that you all do, and it's so important, right? You want to focus on that. You want to focus on, okay, this seems insurmountable. This is a barrier. Uh, Let me reach out to my networks. Let me do a Google. Let me talk to, someone at Osh. Let me like talk to all of the resources we have to try to figure out, okay, what's a solution to this tough problem. And then don't add too many action steps for one meeting. Like 3 to 4 action steps for a meeting. You don't want to overwhelm. Um, yeah, you don't, that's like the size of the action steps matters there. If somebody's doing a couple really big things, or 3 or 4 smaller things, but you want to make sure the overall like number of goals or action steps is pretty limited for each period of work. Okay. So the last thing I'm going to talk at you about is implementation. When you're getting to actually doing these action steps, you want to focus every check-in, right? You're going to have certain things you do every time you do a management meeting with someone and check in about this housing plan. You're going to, say hi and just ask how they're doing. You're going to do human connection. And every meeting, you're going to check in about the previously identified goals and action steps. That should be a focus of every meeting. You're gonna make that a routine, make it really clear and expected that, yeah, we're gonna focus on the housing plan. That's gonna be a big part of our focus when we work together. You want to absolutely make sure you're documenting all of the progress and all the next steps. Just agreeing like this is what we're gonna do out loud. That's an important part, but then write it down and share that with the person that you're working with. Share it in like printed notes or an email or in a text message, like, hey, based on what we talked about today, this is what I'm doing, this is what you're doing. Absolutely provide support and help in your areas of expertise, right? Figuring out what resources exist, connecting to those resources. And also, you want to honor that these are human beings, mostly adult human beings. And you don't want to assume that they want you to do everything for them. You don't have time to do everything for them. And also, your support is not going to be forever. So you definitely want to be thinking about where is the balance between like, yeah, this person does need this support from me in order to get this done versus like I can step back and wait uh, for that person to ask me for the help that they need. Um, and remember, we're focused on housing. Uh, it is so important to address a lot of the underlying issues folks have, healthcare, mental health, all of those things. And all of those things are so much easier to address after someone is in safe, stable housing. So always remembering that. Our last activity here is another breakout. I think we are a pretty large group, but I really appreciated the engagement we've had in the chat and coming off mute. So I'm going to propose that we do this as a full group. I'm just going to rely on you all to chime in and be as engaged as you have been. So thinking about um, planning, like, meeting to meeting with a person, setting those action steps, and then implementing those action steps. How do you, in your practice, how do you decide which steps the client should be responsible for and which ones the staff support, the case manager, the mentor should be responsible for? Take a minute to think about that. Feel free to share in the chat or go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to share out loud. Seeing some focused typing. Barriers and accessibility. Yeah. Justin, if you're up for saying more about that, I think it's a good point.
Sure. So when they're like say in the action plan we have things that need to be obtained, or let's say right now we in our county we have the VTAs on strike. So if they need to get somewhere and like, okay, well I can't get there because I don't have I have my bus pass, but the bus isn't running. So what can I do as far as okay, you know what, I'll pick it up for you since we have the availability and I'll bring it to you. But we're going to get this goal completed. We're not going to allow the VTA to dictate your success.
Yeah.
So I'll pick it up for you, and then as I'm dropping it off for you, we can have a meeting to discuss how finish this plan along with it, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
Something like that. That's pretty broad, but yeah.
No, I love that. Yeah, thanks for expanding on that. That's a really good point. That like, if someone isn't able to get to a place to do a thing, like even consider like, can you give them a ride to do it? Can you pick it up? Like, what is the appropriate response there?
Right.
And I love that we're not letting the VTA's advocacy for their employment interfere with our housing programs. That's good.
Right.
Yeah.
Though at this point it kind of is, but
yeah.
we'll get over it.
Yeah. What else? What other things do you all consider?
I think that a lot of the times we also look at kind of like what he was saying. For example, if they don't have the money, we know we have resources such as like the birth certificate waivers or the ID waivers. There's also really looking at the whole picture and listening to them. Because if it's a single mom with like 3 kids, I don't expect her to come and meet me per se, because we need to do like a recertification. So meeting them where they're at too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that, Denise. Just understanding the person's whole life situation. Yeah, and asking for things from them that are reasonable and like meeting them literally where they are. And also figurative where they are. Yeah. And I also, you were making a point. I think part of that point was like, there are just certain things that you have access to that you can get for them that they couldn't get on their own. Things that can only be applied for or gotten through a provider. Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What about I'm skipping a question down to the beautiful third box there, that beautiful purple. How do you prevent clients from feeling overwhelmed by action planning? And I've rephrased that. You know, not how do you prevent, but how do you help keep clients from feeling overwhelmed? Baby steps. Yep. Small, small, achievable steps. What else can help?
What you said in the beginning about explaining the whole process, walking them through that, um, letting them know this is going to be a process, and but the process will get you to where you need to go.
Yep. Love that. Yeah.
Also letting them know that, we're here to help as well. That assuring that up front, being like, okay, this may be overwhelming, but no, just realize I'm the one writing this, meaning I'm helping you from the get-go. So I'm not doing it for you, but I'm
Mhm.
here to help you get it so you can do it for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, Justin. I
You
see in
know,
the chat from Denise, you're not alone.
you're not alone.
Yeah.
I think it's important that they know that there's a good support for them, but sometimes we have to walk them through it. I was just talking to one of my team members. We were saying yesterday, sometimes you have to hold their hand, even though they're adults, but you have to hold their hand to walk them through the process. Because
Yeah.
though the process may seem, man, I can't accomplish that, or I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get
Hmm.
through that, but I think when they have the support and somebody like the gentleman was saying, is that to reassure them that we're there for them
Yeah.
from the beginning to the end.
Yeah.
A lot of
Yeah.
times what happens is that people give up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huge. I mean, I think about my experience as an adult human, where I am so fortunate. I have so many other adult humans in my life who I can pick up the phone and call them, and they can talk me through a problem. Or, like, I don't like going out and interacting with strangers, so changing my bank account to a different bank is like something I've been thinking of doing for 3 years. I need to talk to someone about that. I need my hand held because I'm a human.
Being realistic, like you just said, and letting them know, hey, we also feel overwhelmed,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
even just looking at the document could be overwhelming for us that we have to do all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
But just letting them know, hey, we can both be overwhelmed together
Yeah.
and get through this, and show them how to use coping skills to work through that.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and I want to call out a couple things in the chat that I think are great. Checking in throughout the process, taking breaks if you see they're getting overwhelmed, just being aware of that and giving space, giving check-ins, but also giving that space, right? If someone's saying, "Hey, I need a minute," um, you know, you can pull back a little bit and then come back and start checking in, right? Like just listening to their needs, putting the ball in their court, especially with things that are important to them, and identifying what that is. Yeah, coming back to like revisiting other accomplishments. Like, look what you did. You did this. You did this thing. And sometimes that's even like, hey, you're here. Being here at this point, having, gotten yourself here, look at how much that took. You can do this next hard thing too. Yeah, letting them vent at the beginning of the meeting, just checking in about how they're doing. Yeah, hearing them out. Okay, I love this. We are going to wrap up this training
Letting them
because
know. Oh,
Go ahead.
I was going to say also letting them know this is a reset on their entire life. And they're looking after their future self. So when people know that they're getting a chance to reset, they don't look at it as tasks and some agendas that they have to yield by.
Mhm.
It's all for you, for you. It's all for you, for you. And I'm only here to help facilitate and hold your hand, like Tony said.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. And then there's concrete stuff like coffee and snacks. Yeah. All of these strategies, like they work together. And like anything, like one thing isn't gonna be the magic bullet for everybody. But you use all these strategies, you use what you have to do the really good work you're doing. And I'd love to, this isn't the end because this is one of two rapid rehousing live sessions we're going to do. But I want to end this session by a huge thank you. You all, thank you for your participation in the meeting today. Thank you for sharing with your colleagues and helping their learning. But also thank you for the work that you do. I want to acknowledge that right now, this is a time that it feels hard and it feels a little bit more scary than usual to do this work. And it feels a little more scary than usual to be, a person who needs support. So that means that now more than ever, the work you do is so valuable. I appreciate it. We see you, and I hope that you sort of can feel the value of what you're doing, just for the individual people that you're supporting. So we will be sending out the date and time of the next training session. And you will all, because you're registered for this training, get that like directly to you. We'll also announce it on the listservs. It's going to be in the very beginning of May, so it will be a bit. But I'm going to keep in touch with you all in the meantime by sending out some follow-up resources from this part of the training and by connecting you to an online training resource that we have that is around some of that problem-solving piece of rapid rehousing. So I really hope to see you all the next session in a little over a month, and you will be getting a couple of emails from me in the meantime. But yes, and I hope the rest of your day is what you need it to be. We'll see you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Eli.
Yeah, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Can I have a
Amazing.
minute with you after this?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll stick around.
Thank you.
Folks. And is this you just want it to be me and you convo or?
Oh no, I mean it's
Okay,
fine.
cool. Go ahead and
Um, so I had registered for this, but I did not receive a link, so I had to use one of my colleagues. And you mentioned that you're going to send out the slides and everything. I just want to make sure that you see me in your registration and I receive a follow-up
yeah.
email.
I will have you, I'm writing down your name here. I'll also have you in Zoom as someone who attended. So yeah, I will make sure that you're on the list that I use.
You need my email address?
You want to put that in the chat for me? Just make sure it's, if you're on your own Zoom account, it should show up in my attendance report. But just in case, I'll take it down. And then I do want to I'll also look into that just to make sure you registered, because Zoom should automatically send an email with a link. And so yeah, I just want to make sure our system's not did
Yeah,
it set up right and then there's not something broken there. So I'll
yeah,
look
I
into
know I had registered, but I don't
yeah.
think
Yeah.
maybe my fault. I didn't receive
What?
the link, so
I don't know. Who knows what happens with email and Zoom? It's all a black
technology.
box.
Also, we're fallible too, we're human. So I
Yeah.
just sent you a direct message with my email.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right.
Have a great day.
Great. Thank you all. I'll see you.
Bye-bye.
I'm going to close down the Zoom unless anybody else has questions. Okay.